All right, so for this deep dive, you've given us quite the SEC complaint to dig into.
Yeah.
We're talking International Business Renewable Energy, and it looks like potentially some shady dealings.
Lots to unpack here.
Definitely sounds like our kind of challenge, though, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just to kind of set the stage for everyone, this complaint was filed on November 20th, 2024 by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's targeting Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani.
Right.
Two executives at Adani Green Energy Ltd. And it alleges a pretty intricate bribery scheme.
Yeah, definitely a lot of moving parts in this one.
So before we get into like the really, detailed specifics of a complaint itself, I'm curious, what were your initial thoughts when you first kind of came across this whole story?
Well, I mean, the thing that immediately jumped out at me was just the sheer scale of Adani Green Energy's ambitions.
Yeah.
Right? But this is a company that's part of the massive Adani Group.
Right.
And they've been very, very vocal about their goal to become the world's largest solar power producer by 2025.
Yeah, and that aggressive push for growth, especially in India's booming renewable energy market, is a crucial part of this story.
Absolutely.
But it seems like those ambitions might have come at a cost, huh?
Exactly. And that's where this SEC complaint really comes in.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of a company that was very publicly touting its commitment to ESG.
Right.
Environmental, social governance principles.
Sure.
While allegedly engaging in some, very questionable practices behind the scenes.
Okay, so we've got this really fascinating contrast between Adani Green Energy's outward image and the allegations that are laid out in this complaint. So let's dig into those allegations. Specifically, what exactly is the SEC accusing them of?
So the crux of the complaint revolves around what are called manufacturing-linked projects.
Okay.
These are these massive undertakings that involve the construction of solar component manufacturing plants in India.
Got it.
Coupled with agreements to sell a really huge amount of solar power capacity to the Solar Energy Corporation of India.
SEC.
SEC, right?
So huge potential for Adani Green Energy.
Oh, absolutely. Massive potential.
But it sounds like there were some pretty major roadblocks along the way.
There were, yeah, for sure. And this is where the alleged bribery scheme really enters the picture.
Okay.
According to the complaint, the Indian state governments and their power distribution companies, which are known as DISCOMs, were really hesitant to buy solar power from SCCI at the prices that Adani Green and another company, Azure, had initially proposed.
Right.
The market had kind of shifted.
Yeah.
Those prices were just too high.
That makes sense. So essentially, Adani Green Energy had these grand plans.
Yes.
But was facing a major bottleneck in getting the state governments on board.
Exactly. And that's where things allegedly took a turn for the worse.
Okay.
The complaint alleges that Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani, with Sagar playing a key role, began offering incentives to state government officials to secure those really crucial power supply agreements, or PSAs.
Ah, incentives. I think we all know what that's code for. But let's not beat around the bush here. We're talking about bribes, right?
Yes, that's what the SEC is alleging.
Straight up.
And we're not talking about small sums here.
Right.
The complaint suggests that hundreds of millions of dollars were either paid or promised to officials in various Indian states.
Wow, that's a staggering amount.
It is.
And what's even more striking is that this alleged bribery scheme was happening while Adani Green Energy was actively issuing green bonds to raise funds from investors, including U.S. investors.
Yeah, that's a key point here. The SEC is arguing that Adani Green Energy essentially misled investors by presenting this squeaky clean image of a company that was committed to ethical practices.
Right.
While simultaneously engaging in these alleged backroom dealings.
So essentially saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly.
But how exactly did they manage to keep those two worlds separate?
Right.
I mean, wouldn't those bribes have left some kind of paper trail?
Well, that's where things get even more intriguing. The complaint actually details how those alleged bribes were tracked through internal Adani Green records, with payments tied to specific states and agreements.
Wow.
There were even discussions about how to obscure those payments through transactions with Azure.
Hold on. Azure, the company that was jointly awarded the manufacturing-linked projects with Adani Green.
That's right.
So they were allegedly in on this, too.
That's what the SEC is suggesting.
Yeah.
And the details of how Azure was allegedly involved in this scheme are fascinating in their own right.
Okay, I am hooked. But before we dive into Azure's role, I think it's worth pausing for a second and considering the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
We're talking about allegations of bribery, on a massive scale within a sector, renewable energy, that's often touted as a beacon of hope for a more sustainable future.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This case raises some very uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
If these allegations are proven, it could have a chilling effect on investor confidence, not just in Adani Green Energy, but in the entire renewable energy sector.
And it makes you wonder what drove Gautam Adani and his nephew to allegedly resort to these tactics.
Right.
Was it purely a matter of profit, or were there other motives at play here?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Right. And it speaks to a larger issue that we'll delve into later.
Okay.
The potential for corruption to undermine even the most well-intentioned efforts to transition to a more sustainable future.
All right, so we've laid out the initial allegations and started to unpack some of the bigger questions that this case raises. Now let's dive back into the specifics and explore how Azure allegedly fits into this intricate web of bribery and deceit.
Okay, let's do it. So we left off talking about Azure's alleged involvement in all of this.
Right.
Now remember, Azure was the company that had jointly secured those manufacturing-linked projects with Adani Green.
Yeah.
And the SEC complaint suggests that once those crucial contracts with SECI were locked into the Adani, Adonis went back to Azure, expecting them to pony up their share of the alleged bribe money.
Makes sense in a twisted sort of way, but I'm guessing Azure wasn't exactly keen on handing over a suitcase full of cash, were they?
No, not quite.
Okay.
The complaint details how, instead of a straightforward cash payment, Azure allegedly opted for a more subtle approach.
Right.
What the SEC describes as a transfer of value.
Okay. Walk me through this. What exactly does a transfer of value look like in this context?
Well, to put it simply, Azure essentially ceded control of a significant chunk of the manufacturing-linked projects back to SECI. Specifically, they gave up their rights to sell 2.3 gigawatts of power capacity.
Okay.
A portion that was linked to agreements with Andhra Pradesh.
Hold on. They just gave up a lucrative part of the project. Why on earth would they do that?
That's precisely what the SEC is trying to unravel.
Right.
Their argument is that this seemingly generous move on Azure's part was actually a cleverly disguised way to repay their portion of the alleged bribe money to Adani Green without drawing too much attention.
So instead of directly handing over cash, they took a calculated financial hit.
Right.
Which indirectly benefited Adani Green.
Exactly.
That's a pretty roundabout way to settle a debt, wouldn't you say?
It certainly is, and it speaks to the lengths to which these companies allegedly went to try to conceal their actions.
Right.
The SEC is painting a picture of a sophisticated scheme involving intricate financial maneuvering, all designed to keep those alleged bribes under wraps.
It's like a financial shell game, but with millions of dollars at stake instead of just a P.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that corruption can often take on very subtle and sophisticated forms.
Yeah.
It's not always about suitcases full of cash being exchanged in dark alleys.
Which makes it all the more challenging to detect and prosecute.
For sure.
But let's zoom out a bit. We've been focusing on the alleged mechanics of the bribery scheme, but what about the bigger picture? What are the potential consequences of all this? Not just for Adani Green and Azure, but for the renewable energy sector as a whole.
Yeah, that's a crucial question. This case has the potential to really shake investor confidence in the entire sector. Remember, Adani Green Energy had positioned themselves as a leader in the transition to renewable energy, attracting billions of dollars in investments, including through those green bonds we discussed earlier.
Right, and if those investments were secured based on a false pretense of ethical conduct, that's a huge problem.
Absolutely. It raises serious questions about the due diligence process, about how investors can truly assess the ethical claims of companies operating in a space like renewable energy, where reputation is often paramount.
It also makes you wonder about the potential ripple effects within India itself.
Right.
India has set some pretty ambitious targets for renewable energy production, aiming to become a global leader in this space. Could this scandal derail those plans?
It's certainly a possibility. The Indian government has been actively promoting renewable energy as a key pillar of its economic growth strategy.
Right.
This case, if it leads to widespread distrust and scrutiny, could hinder those efforts.
And what about the political fallout? We're talking about allegations of bribery involving high-ranking government officials. This can't be good for the current administration, can it?
It's definitely a political headache, to say the least.
Yeah.
It could lead to calls for investigations, potential resignations, and even fuel public discontent.
It's almost like a domino effect. You start with these alleged bribes aimed at securing specific contracts.
Right.
And suddenly you've got this cascade of potential consequences, legal, financial, political, and even environmental, if it slows down India's transition to renewable energy.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder that corruption doesn't operate in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It has the power to undermine entire industries, economies, and even societal progress.
And it underscores the crucial role that transparency, accountability, and a robust legal framework play in ensuring that the transition to a more sustainable future is built on solid ground.
Couldn't agree more, but before we get too philosophical here, I think there's one more piece of this puzzle. We need to examine the human element.
Right at the end of the day, this isn't just about corporate entities or abstract financial transactions. There are real people involved, individuals who made decisions, took risks, and potentially faced consequences.
And that's where things get particularly interesting, because understanding the motivations of the pressures that might have driven those decisions is key to grasping the full complexity of this case.
It's easy to get caught up, in the weeds of corporate maneuvering and the financial jargon.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's this whole human side to this story that we can't ignore. We're talking about Gautam Adani, a guy who's been hailed as like this visionary entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah, a captain of industry.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
And his nephew, Sagar Adani, who has been like rapidly rising through the ranks of the Adani Group.
Yeah.
These are people who have enjoyed immense success. They've built empires.
Yeah.
What could have possibly driven them to allegedly risk it all in a bribery scheme like this?
It's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, was it purely greed? Just this desire to amass even more wealth and power? Or were there other factors at play? Maybe a sense of invincibility, like a belief that they were above the law.
It's impossible to say for sure without getting inside their heads.
Right.
But I think it's important to at least consider the context in which these alleged decisions were made.
Yeah.
India's renewable energy sector is incredibly competitive.
Oh, it's cutthroat.
There's a lot of pressure to secure these contracts, to deliver on these ambitious promises.
For sure.
And to maintain that image of success.
Yeah, you got to keep that momentum going.
Right. So maybe it was a combination of factors. Ambition, pressure, perhaps even a sense of desperation to maintain their position at the top.
I think that's a very real possibility.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even the most successful people can be susceptible to making these, bad choices, especially when the stakes are so high.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it also highlights the importance of having, strong corporate governance structures in place and a culture of compliance.
Yeah.
When people feel like they can act with impunity, that's when things can really go off the rails.
It makes you wonder what happens next. What are the potential consequences for Gautam Adani and Sagar Adani if these allegations are actually proven in court?
Well, the SEC has a range of tools at its disposal.
Right.
They could seek substantial financial penalties, bar the Adonis from serving as officers or directors of publicly traded companies, and even potentially pursue criminal charges.
Wow, that would be a massive fall from grace for these individuals who were once considered titans of industry.
Right.
It also makes you think about the broader message that this sends to the business world.
Yeah.
Especially in these, emerging markets like India.
For sure.
Yeah.
It really reinforces the importance of transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct.
Right.
It shows that no one, regardless of their wealth or their status, is above the law.
Right.
And it underscores the need for strong regulatory frameworks that can effectively deter and punish corporate misconduct.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the intricacies of this SEC complaint, the alleged bribery scheme, the potential fallout for Adani Green Energy, and the broader implications for the renewable energy sector and India's economy as a whole.
The big one.
But before we wrap things up, I think it's important to circle back to the human element that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
This case, at its core, is a story about choices, about the decisions that we make when faced with pressure, ambition, and temptation.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that ethics really do matter.
Absolutely.
That integrity is crucial, and that the pursuit of success should never come at the cost of our values.
Couldn't have said it better myself, and I think that's a really powerful note to end on.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been a fascinating exploration of this really complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
And hopefully it's given you, our listeners, some food for thought and a deeper understanding of the forces at play in the global renewable energy landscape.
It's a wild world out there.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.